September 1944. The world was burning itself to ash. Yet, in a quiet corner of the Eastern Front, the war paused, if only for breath. A German soldier stood among golden fields of rye, rifle slung low, sweat and dust clinging to his uniform. He was 22, exhausted, and had long forgotten why the fighting began. The sound of distant artillery rolled like slow thunder, a reminder that peace was only pretending. Then he saw her. A girl, barefoot, her dress the color of faded linen, moving through the tall grain as though the war had never touched her world. The wind lifted her hair, sunlight glinted through the stalks, and for a moment he forgot which side of the line he stood on. She looked up. Their eyes met a fraction too long. No words, no salute. Just the silent recognition of two souls stranded between duty and survival. Her name was Ilse. No one knew where she came from. Some said she was a local farmhand left behind when the village emptied. Others whispered that she was not what she seemed, that she had been seen near the forest, talking to men who vanished at dusk. In war, rumors were more dangerous than bullets. But at that moment, all he saw was a girl who still believed the world could be kind. And years later, long after the war had ended and the uniforms had turned to rags, her name would appear again in a file stamped classified, under both German and Allied records. How that was possible, no one could explain. The summer of 1944 was the last one that smelled of earth and grain instead of smoke and blood. The Eastern Front had fractured. German forces were falling back, towns abandoned, and every road was a graveyard of rusted armor and scorched carts. Yet, in that small patch of farmland, time seemed suspended. Days began with the low hum of insects and ended with distant shellfire echoing beyond the forest line. Between them, life, fragile and stubborn, continued. The soldier's unit had been ordered to guard a bridge that no longer mattered. He spent his hours patrolling empty roads, repairing fences that no one would cross. And then, when duty allowed, he would watch her Ilse working alone in the fields. She never spoke first. He never dared to approach too closely. The unspoken rule of the war hung between them. Soldiers do not belong among civilians, especially not now. Not when everyone could be a spy, or worse, a witness, but the line blurred with each passing day. She began leaving small things on the fence post, a loaf of coarse bread, a few berries wrapped in cloth. Once, even a folded note that said only, "For luck." He didn't ask where it came from. He just kept it, tucked inside his uniform, close to his heart. Sometimes, he saw her glance toward the forest, as if waiting for something or someone. Once, near dusk, she froze, staring at the tree line. The soldier followed her gaze but saw nothing except a shadow slipping through the birches. He said nothing, neither did she. War had taught them both that questions could kill faster than bullets. Still, there was something about her presence that made the silence feel alive, something that whispered of hope or danger. And as the harvest deepened and the days grew shorter, the soldier began to sense the faint shift in the air, like the world itself was holding its breath. Because peace in wartime never lasted long. And that summer was almost over. One afternoon, as thunderclouds gathered beyond the horizon, Ilse came to the outpost carrying a bundle of rye. Her hands were trembling not from the weight, but from something unspoken. She thanked the soldier for his help with the harvest, her voice barely more than a whisper. Then, as she turned to leave, a gust of wind tore through the fields and sent something fluttering from her apron, a folded paper sealed with a wax mark. He bent to pick it up, but she snatched it back too quickly. Her face went pale, her breath uneven. For a second, he saw fear in her eyes, the kind that soldiers recognized instantly. He didn't ask, not yet. But that night, as he sat in his dugout writing a report no one would read, he couldn't stop thinking about it. The seal. The faint red mark that looked nothing like the local farmers' signs. It was military or partisan. The next morning, he noticed two of his men whispering near the mess tent. A rumor had begun about a woman in the fields passing notes to unknown men, and in wartime, rumors could become death sentences. The soldier's pulse quickened. He wanted to believe she was innocent, just a frightened villager trying to survive. But every day, her movements became more cautious, her eyes sharper, her silence longer. One evening, when the sun was sinking behind the fields, she appeared again. This time, she looked straight at him and said softly, "Do you ever feel the war watching you?" He didn't answer. She smiled faintly, as if that was all the reply she needed. And then, without warning, she handed him the paper. "Keep it," she said. "If anything happens, you'll understand." He didn't open it. He couldn't. He hid it inside his jacket and tried to forget. But the next morning, when he woke, the letter was gone, his bunk disturbed, his satchel emptied, and by noon, military police were searching for the barracks. It began just before dawn. Engines roared through the mist, and boots struck the frozen dirt. The air reeked of fuel and nerves. The Feldgendarmerie, the field police, had arrived. Word spread fast. The command suspected partisan infiltration. Someone was passing coded messages through the villages, and a woman had been seen near the old mill after curfew. Her name was on their list. Ilsa. The soldier's stomach tightened as he watched them search her home, a small thatched cottage near the rye fields. They overturned baskets, tore open sacks, and ripped through her bedding, looking for hidden notes, radios, anything. She stood silent, her hands bound, eyes dry, not pleading, not afraid, just waiting as though this moment had always been coming. When they found nothing, one of the officers spat on the floor. "She's clever," he muttered. "They always are." Then he turned to the soldier. "You know her, don't you?" For a second, the world narrowed to a heartbeat. The soldier lied. He said she was just a farmhand, harmless, simple, barely literate. It was a dangerous lie. Lies, in wartime, had their own gravity. The officer studied him for a long moment, then gave a thin smile. "If she's clean," he said, "you won't mind if we take her anyway." And they did. The truck rumbled away, leaving only tire tracks in the mud and a silence that felt heavier than gunfire. That night, he couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. He paced the outpost until dawn. Then, unable to bear it, he forged a dispatch, a false report claiming Ilsa had been cleared by division command and assigned to a refugee convoy, heading west. It was a desperate gamble, but by the time headquarters realized, she was gone. No one knew how. Some said the convoy was ambushed. Others swore they saw a woman fitting her description, walking with partisans near the forest. All he found, weeks later, was a scarf. Her scarf snagged on a barbed fence by the bridge. The same scarf she'd worn the day they met, and for the rest of the war he carried it with him, through retreating, through winter, through the fall of everything he knew. By the spring of 1945, the Reich was dust. Cities burned like funeral pyres, and whole divisions melted into columns of refugee soldiers without flags, civilians without homes. The soldier was captured near the Elbe. His uniform was torn, his rifle long lost. For months, he labored in a Soviet camp, moving stones and digging ditches, his mind somewhere far away in the fields, in the summer, with her. He tried to forget. But war has a way of clinging to memory like smoke. Years passed, the borders changed, the camps emptied. One grey morning, he found himself back in a ruined village that looked vaguely familiar. The same river, the same bridge. Only the fields were gone, replaced by weeds and rust. He lived quietly, repairing roofs and rebuilding fences. The war was supposed to be over. But one day, while helping an aid worker translate Red Cross records, he saw a name that stopped his breath. Ilse Müller. Status: repatriated, unknown origin. The date: 1946. The location: Lübeck, in the British zone. Impossible. He went to the office. They said she'd been processed as a displaced person traveling under forged documents. No known relatives. No confirmed nationality. And then, in a sealed Allied file, he found something stranger. A transcript of an interrogation from an MI9 officer. It described a woman who had passed intelligence to both sides, guiding partisans through minefields 1 month, smuggling wounded German soldiers the next. The officer had written, "Her motives unclear, possibly operating under humanitarian impulse." The soldier stared at the words for a long time. Humanitarian impulse. Could it be her? There was no photograph, no fingerprints, only a single line scrawled at the bottom of the page. Last seen boarding relief transport to Copenhagen. Identity uncertain. He read it again and again until the ink blurred. For the first time, he realized something the war had hidden from him. Maybe she hadn't been running from anyone. Maybe she'd been trying to save them all. Decades later, the soldier returned to the fields. The land had healed. New wheat swayed where the trenches once lay. Children laughed near the river where bodies had once drifted away unseen. He was an old man, now thin, quiet, his medals tarnished, his memories too heavy to polish. He came not for redemption, but for silence. He found the old fence post, still standing barely. The same one where she'd once left a small note that said, "For luck." He sat there until the sun began to fall, tracing the horizon that once burned red with fire. The wind whispered through the grain, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw her again walking through the field, her linen dress brushing the wheat, sunlight flickering in her hair. He knew it wasn't real. But memory has its own geography, its own physics. It doesn't obey time. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the scarf, worn thin, frayed by years of touch. It still smelled faintly of smoke and wildflowers. "Did you make it?" he whispered. "Did you ever find peace?" Only the wind answered. Years later, when he finally passed, the scarf was found folded inside his uniform. No family, no papers, no identification, just a single name written in fading ink on a scrap of linen, Ilse. And somewhere, buried deep in Allied archives and forgotten German files, 2 lists still carry her name. One marks her a traitor, the other a rescuer. Neither is the truth. Because in the end, she was something rarer than a soul who refused to choose sides when the world demanded it. And in that quiet rebellion, she became what the war itself could never be merciful. In war, loyalty is remembered, but mercy never leaves a record.